Hey, Rock Youth, thanks for joining us for Teen Talk. It is Friday, and it is ending our series of identity where we've been talking about becoming who God created us to be. Today we're going to wrap up talking about what we learned this week while we talked about the obstacles that get in the way of us becoming who God created us to be. All right, well, it's Friday. Another great day to be talking about what we learned.
Yeah.
Really is our last one, though. 'Cause next week we're going to do something a little different with just kind of recapping the entire summer.
Yeah, lump it all into one thing.
Yeah. So next week we'll just have one video instead of two.
Yep.
But today we're going to talk about what we learned, talking about obstacles. And on Monday we kind of set the stage for the obstacles that are going to come in our life come from our own desires.
Yeah.
Our own and so like Satan tempts us of the things we desire.
Yeah.
Whether it's lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and pride of life. Those are the three things.
Yeah.
He's going to tempt us. That's how he's going to come after us. So this week we've spent learning about ourselves and the things we desire.
Yeah.
Right? And so how have you experienced this in your life? You know, I know this has made you process back and think, like when you look at the chart that we talked about this week. And
yeah, like, looking through the chart, and it does, looking at these kind of things really does make you take your life into segments. And as this whole road of becoming a Christ follower and getting there and accepting the Lord, and then him making you more righteous along the path. But, I fall into every one of these categories at some point in my life.
Yeah, we all do.
And I mean, you come down to, we were talking about comfort and pleasure. Early on in my teenage years and my young adult years, that came down to women or drugs.
Everything's about pleasure.
Yeah, drinking. It's all what can I do to please myself? How can I make myself feel good? How can I numb myself?
How can I make people look high of me? You always want to be in the popular crew.
Oh yeah, you want it. Yeah, you want
lots of friends.
Validation. You want people to think highly of you. So it comes down to pride. Then you have your.
Not that ever leaves. It's not like we're over that or anything like that. It's just it looks completely different.
Exactly. Then you end up moving into what other people have, and then you start having this desire of I would like things, and then it turns into materialism, and then you find yourself striving after I want all of this. I want a big business. I want to have expensive things. I want people to be wow, look what he has. Then it turns into power, and it's so all of these. It's I've fallen into that category at some point in any shape or form, and then especially over the last few months, it's really made me kind of hone in on where because the Lord has really been refining me. Yeah. Especially over the last couple of years, really.
Right.
But over the last couple of months, and then you still fall into these categories.
Oh yeah, because that's the thing is it's the desires of the flesh. They never leave you.
No.
People often will say, I prayed for God to remove this desire from me. He doesn't do that. This is the desire of your flesh. Your flesh doesn't go away. I mean, Paul even says, I prayed that God would remove this 3 times. He said, no, I'm perfected in your weakness.
Right.
And so God doesn't remove the desire. We choose to say no to the desire.
Exactly. And I think even more of a present example would be, I just walked away from the businesses and the material world, and honestly I feel the Lord has really worked that out in me to where it's not a desire per se so much, but the desire is still there, the trigger point, and in order to prevent myself from hitting that trigger point, I had to come to a conclusion if I take on a job, then I could spiral back down. Right. So I had to make just a choice you're not doing any side jobs, you're just you have to just walk away from that.
Yeah.
And
I was in the construction world doing tile and flooring and things like that for a long time, and did pull in a ministry, but then kept it, like you said, as a side job, and would do jobs and things like that. And whenever an opportunity came up, immediately what would happen is I wouldn't go okay, let me take this whatever $1,000 I'm going to get from a flooring job and apply it to debt or anything like that. I go, I can buy it.
I can buy something to go hunt with, or a new toy for myself.
Vacation, that kind of thing. And interesting enough, over time, God has like ripped that desire out of my heart, where like somebody's like, hey, you know, I could use some help. I'm like, hey, I got the tools, here you go.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
Like I don't even want, like, God has changed my own heart. Like it's not me, but God has changed my heart, where it's like, I don't even desire to have it on the side or make any extra money from it, you know, because God has changed who I am.
Exactly.
You know, and so like you say, like your desires like for the flesh and having those things and this extra money or whatever, over time with faithfulness to the Lord,
just go away.
Yeah.
Like
which
they
is
just,
so cool.
And that's what's happened with a lot of this as you look at this chart and like you flow through your life, like the Lord has worked through a lot of these.
Yeah.
And then, but it's kind of an ongoing thing. You're constantly looking to the Lord to perfect you.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was cool, going for like, as far as going through this, like the different layers in my life. And then now there are things that I struggle with now that I'm seeing that I'm on this chart with.
Right.
That I'm like, okay, I didn't realize that was there, you know, and
right.
you know.
Right. As well as like that's what these charts and different things like that do, is they help us see more than like one word, like you said, lust of the flesh. Well, what is that?
Yeah, that's broad.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's intentionally broad because there is a lot that it
it's
implies.
different for every person.
So that chart helps you. If you didn't get to go do it, go back to the discussion sheet, find the chart, really kind of dig into who you are and the struggles you have and where your desires and temptations are at.
Yeah.
What's something you learned this week?
So I'm going to go back into, originally I kind of had it in the Matthew, the parables of the sower, just like a better understanding and revelation of all of that. But I think
like the four soils.
The four soils, and like where people are at, and
what that means,
and what that means, and how I've been in that, like every one of those soils,
right?
And it's so true, like being in the planting world, like how that works, like his analogy for all of it, his parable for it is great. But for me, I think it comes down to like in this pride category, you have this validation part, where I've lived the most of my life, you know, like kind of like doing my own thing. Didn't really care to have too much validation because you're in control of all of this. But now I'm in a world where I don't know a whole lot of what I'm doing. And you know what I mean?
You have to rely on the Lord.
I have to rely on the Lord. And sometimes you find yourself looking for validation with certain things. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And
well,
I know
even for me, when I look at that, like, so you're looking for validation. I'm on the other side. Like, I don't really struggle with validation, but I hate rejection.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
Which that's a very tough thing to deal with. You know, like for me personally, but not so much for you.
Yeah.
Like the rejection, whatever.
Right.
But tell me I'm doing good.
Exactly.
You know, which are they're the same thing, but they're
like a little bit different, and they kind of like, and if you don't get the validation, sometimes you can get the rejection. Like you feel
rejected because you didn't get validation.
Because you didn't get the validation, and you're looking to like, I'm in this whole new world, like, and I don't know much of what I'm doing, and you're hoping to like, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing this right? Like, and really that's a pride thing. And so that was something I learned, because you look at it on this chart, like that is a pride thing.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to fix my eyes on the Lord, keep like striving to do better.
For sure. Yeah.
And you know, so.
Yeah. See, like when I think about that, for me, it's not the like I don't need you to come alongside and tell me I'm doing a good job.
Yeah.
Like I just don't need that.
Yeah.
But if you came along and said, "Man, you did a terrible job," like, oh my goodness, like, you know that.
Yeah.
So that's how I fall. Like you're talking about acceptance there in that specific one, you know. For me, learning this week, because again, back to the chart and really the spectrum of different things, I learned about myself and the fact that I struggle with pride a lot more than I thought I did.
Yeah.
I didn't think I struggled with pride. I've talked a lot about my life and how I struggle with the lust of the flesh, you know, just with my sin, you know. So like, there was a long time I thought like, oh well, you know, I predominantly struggle with flesh. Like I might have some pride, but it's not really there. Eyes is in the middle. Like I do desire to have things other people have, but it's not all the time. You know, so I kind of felt like it was like 1, 2, 3. And really it was like 1 and then kind of 2 and not really 3, but maybe a little bit sometimes. You know what I mean?
Right.
But then digging into this chart like showed me like, oh, You struggle with all of them all the time.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, a lot of the time you just put it into one category, pride into one category. Well, I'm not that. I'm not a prideful person.
I really don't think of myself as a prideful person.
Yeah.
But when you look in these descriptions of what pride is,
you're like, oh, okay.
Like people don't see that I'm fearful of rejection.
Yeah.
But in my soul and my heart, I'm fearful of rejection. So because of it,
that's an act of pride.
I go and I work harder to not get rejection.
Right.
And maybe people don't ever see that, but it's still about me.
Yeah.
You know, and I learned that about myself this week.
Yeah.
And it's a kick in the teeth.
It is. It really is a kick in the teeth. You know, the learn aspect of this. Like typically when we do this on Friday, what did you learn? It's usually the kick in the teeth.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Either that or the tough passage.
Yep.
Like the tough passage, the learn passage, or they tend to be like that.
The other thing I learned too was with the spectrum thing on each of them. There's let's the eyes. There's like this experience thing.
Oh, like Solomon was talking about.
You know, like it's not just stuff. So like, I like traveling, or I like to go do something.
Yeah.
That can be as much of a materialistic, I want what they have.
Right.
Like, I don't know, you see somebody, because I like traveling, you see somebody post that they were in this place or that place on this cruise, or in the mountains, or skiing, or snowmobiling. Like, it's not about, oh, look at my boat in my yard. It's like, man, I wish I had that.
Yeah, I wish I could go on that trip. You know, like they just had a cool time. I'd like to go have that time. And then you're like, you catch yourself, you're like, whoa.
Yeah. And so I learned that too, is like, you can really covet is really what it is. You can covet someone's experience, not just stuff.
Yeah. I mean, just even going like to a concert, it could be anything.
Yeah.
Like anytime somebody has a good time, like just that experience in itself. Yeah, I think that like really micros down into, you know.
So I guess I learned a lot this week
in
my own personal life and things I struggle with, which is helpful, like we talked about, because knowing your obstacles, knowing what you struggle with, what you desire, that pull you away from who God created you to be, are going to be what cause you to stumble.
Right.
You know, so knowing those, so when you feel the temptation, when you see the temptation coming, you already have a preset response of like, I'm not going there. I'm not doing that. I'm not watching that. I'm not thinking. You know, the verse, one of my favorite verses, 2 Corinthians 10, cast down every imagination, every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. Like, that's what you have to do here.
Yeah.
Is I see that post on Facebook of somebody going somewhere, and I have to say, I'm not going to think about that.
Yeah, you have to cast it down.
You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
In that moment. When I think about that, like rejection, like fear someone's going to reject me, like I'm not going to think about that. I'm going to cast it down. You know, that's the practical tool to knowing your obstacles.
Exactly. Knowing the trigger points, when it's going to come, what's going to make you feel that way, and then just like recognizing that and then casting it down.
Right.
That's a great verse for that.
Right. So what's something, one of your favorite passages from this week?
So I guess it could be kind of morbid, because it could fall into a tough passage too, okay?
Morbid.
Just because,
His favorite passage is morbid. Let's just say
it's a little morbid. And I guess when I was looking at it, I'm like, he's probably thinking, man, he put this in his favorite passage. So in Daniel 4, like the book of Daniel in itself, if you've never read the book of Daniel, I encourage you, at least the first half, like
the first 6 books.
The first
six chapters, I mean.
Yeah, I think you'll be fine. And then the second half, you got to dig into some deep Bible study. You'll be like, what is happening here?
Yeah.
But just you have this guy Nebuchadnezzar. He's the king of this city of Babylon, this great nation, and it's a nation that kind of like really blossomed up overnight in a way.
Yeah.
And you have this guy that kind of exalts himself above everything, and he gets to this point where he's basically takes credit for everything.
Right.
Like, look what I built. He's standing on his balcony like, I did this.
Right.
And God comes and says, oh yeah? Like, I don't think so, man. This wasn't you.
Right.
And throws him out. He ends up eating grass like an ox in the field, has sweat, like the dew of like heaven on his back. He's just like eagle feather, like an animal, like a wild animal in a way. But what's crazy about it is, like, for the whole book of Daniel, like, Babylon was built up in the first place to exercise judgment against Israel. That's where they
Right.
were brought into captivity, and he
Yeah,
only
God gave the power to Nebuchadnezzar to do what he did
yeah,
in order that he could judge the Israelites for their sin.
exactly. And in return, like there are stories in the Bible where we don't see like this restoration happen, and this is why it's my favorite verse, is because even though he used Nebuchadnezzar, his obstacle was his pride and his like power and like
Right.
what he'd done. He ends up getting restored and praises God at the end of the chapter,
Right.
or at the end of the, which is to me, I thought was really cool, and I guess I can relate to a lot because I built up, like that was what I tried to do. I would take a lot of credit for what I did, like what I did
Right.
back in the past, and so I guess it can be a tough verse too.
Well,
because,
this is my passage,
Yeah.
That's my tough one. And because what you see is, again, yes, God does give him the power to raise up to do this and judge the Israelites. Well, then God begins to see that pride well up in him, and he gives him a dream and gives him Daniel to interpret the dream.
Yeah.
And so he knows that his pride is an issue,
Yeah.
right? And then you get to this point here. So he knows the pride's an issue. He knows that if he continues down this path, it's going to go bad for him. So he's been warned, And so it's tough to me because, like, after like looking at my pride and really seeing that I struggle with this, like I relate to Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah.
And I don't want to go here because it says in verse 28 of 4, it says, but all these things did happen to the king. Like all this happened. And it says 12 months later, he was taking a walk on his rooftop. So like he heard this dream. He was really concerned. He was worried. Okay, I'm going to love and praise God. Like I feel like this is everyone's camp scenario.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, okay, I'm back in. I got
I'm all
this.
in. Yeah.
And then 12 months later, you see the slow fade. He's just walking around on his roof, and he looked out across the city. Look at this great city of Babylon. By my own mighty power, I have built this beautiful city. And while these words are still in his mouth, smack, yeah. And so, like, it's my toughest because I'm terrified of that right there happening to me.
Yeah.
Because, like, he's been warned. He knew about it. He knew this could happen. And he still he lets the desires of his flesh well up in him over time. You know what I mean? Like, it's not overnight. It's not like, okay, good. And then tomorrow no, it's 12 months later. Like, he let the slow fade happen.
Yep.
He forgot about the dream. Oh, maybe that wasn't real. You know what I mean? And so this is like one of those, like, keep near and dear to my heart shock, Pat. Like, I need to remember that this happened to Nebuchadnezzar because it could happen to me.
It can happen to anybody. Look, it happened to David with Bathsheba.
Yeah.
She was on the roof.
Yeah, I mean, we can go down the list.
Yeah, one after another.
Yeah,
but
it's happened over and over to different people in the scripture because, again, it comes back to the lust of the flesh, which is pride, life, and eyes. And so with that, that was your favorite, but this also, like, for me, that was a tough one.
It was kind of like I could have like fused them together for tough.
Right, I gotcha. For me, then my favorite I love Ecclesiastes. I know it's a weird book, and I guess kind of morbid in the sense of Solomon, king of Israel at the time, richest guy, wisest guy, lots of different things, pretty awesome guy. Whole nother different conversation. He just had a mess of wives and concubines and all this kind of
He had
stuff.
an interesting life going on.
Yeah, but at the same time, God did choose to use him even though, like all of us, were sinful men or women. And so at the end of his life, he writes the book of Ecclesiastes. And think about it, he had everything.
Yeah.
And in it, this book starts out just talking about the things that he has. And he tried different things, but it says in chapter 2, I said, come on, let's try pleasure. Verse 4, then I also tried finding meaning in building huge homes for myself and planting beautiful vineyards. And so I became greater than everyone who had lived. Like, he had it all, and he tried all of this stuff, And this is what the book of Ecclesiastes is about, if you ever go and read the whole thing. But he talks about all he had, and then the very last verse, the very last thing he has to say. So he writes 12 chapters, a long letter, He says, all of this stuff, I've had it all. I've done it all. I've experienced it all. The last thing he says, that's the whole story. Here now is my final conclusion. Fear God, obey his commandments, for this is everyone's duty. God will judge us for everything we do, including every secret thing, whether good or bad.
It's pretty cool that God uses Solomon to give him all of this stuff, like the richest man, wisest man that had ever been.
Yeah.
And then you get to see this through this whole book of everything, and he comes to this simple conclusion at the end.
Because honestly, a lot of times what we see and think is like Solomon was an awesome man of God all of his life. Mm-hmm. And honestly, he wasn't.
No.
He had a moment as a young boy where he said,
I'll follow you.
I'll follow you. Just give me wisdom. I need wisdom right now because I'm a young boy and I'm a king.
Yeah.
And God says, okay, I'll give that to you. Well, he doesn't continuously follow God from that point on. Mm-mm. And in that, like you see, I tried doing this. I tried doing this. I tried doing this. I tried all of these things. And guess what? He says they were meaningless. They were useless. And he gets to the very end of his life and he gets to this point, and God does show him the most important thing. And so while he didn't live some kosher, great, good life, he comes to the end and he does recognize, just like Nebuchadnezzar, he does recognize who God is. Yeah. And he says, I had it all. I know you guys, you teenagers, you want to have it all. I had it all. It's unfulfilling. Yeah. The only thing that matters, the whole story. Here now is my final conclusion. Fear God and obey his commandments, for that's everyone's duty. Because God will judge us for everything we do, including every secret thing, whether good or bad. Like you think you're good. You think the world sees you in a right way. But God knows, like what I was showed this week, God knows that you fear rejection, so that's pride. Nobody knows that I fear rejection. I don't show those cards to people. Right. You know what I mean? But I have that pride within me. I have that sin within me, and God will judge me for it.
Yeah. He knows your heart. He knows what's in there.
Right. And so I said that was my favorite passage, but I guess it's pretty tough too.
That's pretty tough.
You know what I mean? But
it's really hard to pick out a favorite on any of this because really this is obstacles. It's kind of like we all have our obstacles in life. Yeah. And they trip us up. And if you're to try to play outside of that, like there are no obstacles, well then you're kind of lying to yourself because you're not you are lying to yourself.
Right. For sure you are.
And so I think a lot of this, that's why it's tough, because everything you read through, like we struggle in one of these areas or a bunch of these areas.
Right.
And I know for me, like as far as the tough, I even put that as my tough. Like the whole thing was tough. Yeah. Because it's really like you're asking the Lord to come through and examine your heart everywhere you go.
Psalm 139. Show me.
Show me. Like we keep saying
show
that.
Show me where I suck.
Yeah, show me where I suck, and let's work on it. And you're like, well, I didn't. Just when you think that like you've kind of like worked on something that's very big in your life, then he goes micro, and you're like, whoa. Like I said, it isn't so micro, and so it's kind of tough. The whole thing is really tough.
Right. And
so I'm sure you're all struggling with lots of, there's probably lots of obstacles that you have as teenagers. Sure, I can remember being a teenager, and maybe it's not like a respect thing or, a validation thing. Maybe it could be anything. It could be drinking. It could be wanting to fit in. It could be, anything like that.
Right. So it's been a fun study, and this week we've learned a lot about ourselves personally, just looking at our own obstacles, where we're at as adult men, but teenagers are struggling with the same things in different ways. And so I hope that you will go back, if you didn't, look at that discussion sheet and really dig into those questions and the chart and really analyze where you're at with obstacles so that you can make a game plan of when I face this temptation, this is how I'm going to, 2 Corinthians 10, I'm going to cast down this thought and not follow through in this temptation and this desire that I have in my flesh, so that you can become who God created you to be. Because the cool thing is, you're a teenager. Yeah. You have your whole life ahead of you, and you can change right now and be a different person. You can change who you are. It's much harder for, like the old dog's new trick thing. Like it's much harder for an adult to change their life. Yeah. And you guys have gone through a major life change and direction change, and that's difficult. But to be in your situation ground up, like I can change my life right now.
I remember being at their age and like going through a lot of those struggles and wishing that I would have at this desire stage like nipped it in the bud and squashed it down and recognized it before it became an obstacle, and then I fell. I ended up falling as a result. Like I let it just completely metastasize into something.
Right.
You know.
So I hope that you guys have enjoyed this series. Join us this next week on Monday as we are going to wrap up, do our final teen talk around the identity series, and do a recap week of everything that's happened this entire summer. It's going to be awesome. So we'll see you Monday to wrap it up.